Asheville, North Carolina, 9:18 p.m. Nathan Cross's old pickup truck rolled slowly up the driveway to the small wooden house at the end of Brookline Street. The headlights swept across the uncut lawn and the peeling white fence. In daylight, the place had potential, as realtors like to say. At night, under the single porch light that flickered like it was running out of breath, it looked like something trying hard not to fall apart. He killed the engine, but stayed behind the wheel a few seconds longer. The whole day at the lumber warehouse had wrung him dry. His hands ached from hauling bricks and pallets. His shoulders felt locked in place. His head buzzed with the constant roar of forklifts and the night shift foreman's shouting. The only thing that finally made him open the door was the thought of Ivy, his 8-year-old daughter, probably already asleep on the old couch in the living room, still clutching the silver fox plush Claire had bought her at the autumn fair 3 years ago. 3 years. That number still hit like a punch. Back then, Nathan had owned a small renovation crew of 6 men, jobs booked months ahead. A real home that actually sounded like laughter lived inside it. Then, his business partner took the big contract money and vanished. Debt piled up. The company collapsed. Claire couldn't handle the constant pressure anymore. One morning, she simply didn't wake up. Stroke, the doctor said. Friends faded. Clients disappeared. All that remained was Nathan, a mountain of unpaid bills, a house the bank almost took, and a little girl who asked every night, "Daddy, does Mommy know I miss her?" He had learned to stay quiet because there was nothing else left to say. But tonight, the moment he looked up from the steering wheel, he saw someone standing at the very end of the driveway. Nathan froze. It wasn't a tree shadow. It wasn't exhaustion playing tricks. A woman stood exactly where the porch light barely reached half her face in darkness, the other half lit just enough to show she wasn't moving. She had been waiting long enough that the cold no longer seemed to bother her. Dark hair fell over her shoulders, hands clasped in front of her. No panic, no hurry, just quiet patience. Nathan stepped out of the truck, slowly, old instincts snapping back into place. He was no longer the kind of man who believed anything just because it looked harmless. "Who's there?" he called, voice low and guarded. The woman took one step forward, enough for the porch light to catch her face fully. Nathan's heart missed a beat. Juliet Mercer. He hadn't seen her in almost 6 years. Juliet had been the one who came before Claire, before the company, before life ground him down into small, hard pieces. They had never been simple exes. They were something more dangerous, two people who could have become everything together, but missed their timing completely. Back then, Juliet smiled easily, wore scarves even before the air turned cold, and looked at people like she wanted to memorize their faces forever. Then she moved to Atlanta for a community development job. Nathan got married. She slipped out of his life quietly, the way 2 parallel lines drift apart. And now here she was, standing in his dark driveway like she had stepped straight out of a memory he had locked away years ago. Juliet. She gave the smallest nod. When she spoke, her voice was lower than he remembered, tired but steady. "I've been waiting almost an hour." Nathan stared at her. "What are you doing here?" Juliet didn't answer right away. She took another half-step closer, close enough that he could see the faint red rims around her eyes. Either she had been crying or she simply hadn't slept well in a long time. Then she leaned in, lowering her voice so only he could hear, "I don't think your story should end like this." Nathan stood completely still. Those words were not something he was ready to hear from anyone, especially not from the woman who had once known the best version of him. He didn't move. The night air felt heavier, the porch light dimmer. Somewhere inside the house, Ivy was sleeping with her fox plush safe for now. Outside, the woman he thought he had lost forever waited in the shadows for an answer he didn't have. Nathan swallowed once, then finally spoke the only thing he could manage. "Come inside." Nathan held the door open and stepped aside so Juliet could enter. The house smelled of old wood, mixed with the faint, cheap lavender soap he bought in bulk at the warehouse store. Ivy's purple backpack lay slumped on the kitchen chair like it had given up for the day. A pair of tiny sneakers, one still tied the other, kicked halfway across the floor, sat near the bottom of the stairs. Everything in the small living room screamed of two people trying to hold a life together with duct tape and hope. Juliet paused on the threshold, her eyes moving slowly across the room as if she were stepping into a place that was both unfamiliar and painfully familiar. "Is your daughter asleep?" she asked, voice soft. Nathan closed the door behind her. "Ivy's upstairs. She has school early tomorrow." Juliet glanced up the narrow staircase, then back at him. "She's grown so much. You've never even met her." "I saw pictures," she said, with a small shrug. "From Laura." Laura. The one friend from the old days who still kept in touch with both of them. Nathan understood immediately. Laura had told Juliet everything. The company collapsed, the partner who ran off with the money, the endless debt. Claire's sudden stroke, the friends who disappeared one by one, the warehouse job that paid just enough to keep the bank from taking the house. "So you came because Laura told you my sad story?" Nathan asked, trying to keep his voice steady as he leaned against the kitchen counter. Juliet didn't dodge the question. She shook her head. "Not only because of that." He pulled out a chair at the small kitchen table. "Sit down." She sat, wrapping her hands around the glass of water he poured for her. Under the warm kitchen light, Nathan could see the changes in her face more clearly. She was still beautiful, but the effortless glow of their 20s was gone. There were fine lines at the corners of her eyes, a quiet weariness beneath the light makeup, the face of someone who had also walked through her own kind of wreckage. "I came back to Asheville 3 weeks ago." Juliet began her voice even like she had practiced this in the car on the way here. The nonprofit in Atlanta shut down after a merger. Before that, I ended a 5-year relationship that was never going to work. Nathan stayed silent, arms crossed, listening. Juliet continued. "I stayed away long enough to forget what home sounds like when rain is coming, to forget the smell of wet leaves on the porch, to forget what it feels like to have someone say your name without expecting anything in return." She lifted her eyes to his. "Then I heard about you." Nathan let out a short, dry laugh. "And you felt sorry for me?" "No." The answer came too fast. "I felt angry." He frowned. "Angry because everyone only talks about what you lost," Juliet said. "The company, the marriage, the friends, the money. But no one talks about the man you used to be. The one who stayed behind after every storm to fix other people's roofs. The one who drove 3 hours in the middle of the night because a coworker's father fell in the garage. The one who worked until he forgot to sleep but still remembered to buy birthday cake for the neighbor's kid." Nathan turned away for half a second. Those words hurt more than he wanted to admit. They reminded him of the version of himself he had buried so deep he thought it was gone. "That man is dead," he said quietly. Juliet shook her head slowly. "No, you just stopped letting anyone see him." The kitchen fell silent. Nathan looked at the woman sitting across from him. She hadn't come with the eager eyes of someone trying to rekindle an old flame. There was no easy romance in her expression, only a sad, patient determination, as if she had driven here holding on to one fragile belief that the Nathan she once knew was still somewhere behind all the exhaustion. "What do you want, Juliet?" he asked at last. She looked down at the glass for a few seconds, then met his eyes again. I'm working at a new community center that just opened on the south side of town. We help families who've lost jobs, lost homes, elderly people in run-down apartments, single mothers being threatened with eviction. The place needs someone who knows how to work with his hands, who can look at a broken house and see more than just crumbling bricks. Nathan gave a short laugh. Sounds like you're offering charity work. I'm offering you a chance, she said, not because I think you need pity, but because I'm afraid if you keep doing what you're doing, warehouse days, exhausted nights, burying yourself inside these four walls one day, Ivy will grow up and only remember her father as a shadow that moved through the house. Nathan's hands tightened until his knuckles turned white. The words were cruel, but they hit their target perfectly. Upstairs, the bed creaked softly, Ivy turning in her sleep. Nathan glanced upward by reflex, then back down at Juliet. She didn't push further. She simply sat there under the old kitchen light, waiting for him to get angry to throw her out, or at least tell her to stop talking. But Nathan couldn't do any of those things, because deep down, he knew she was right, even if he still wasn't ready to hear it. Juliet stood up a few minutes later. The clock on the wall showed it was almost 10. I'm not going to force you, she said at the door, but don't pretend nobody's reaching out a hand. She placed a small piece of paper on the kitchen table, the address of the community center and its opening hours. Then she left. Nathan stood alone in the quiet kitchen long after her car lights disappeared down the street. For the first time in 3 years, someone had looked straight at him and seen more than just a broken man trying to survive. And that feeling scared him more than anything else had, in a very long time. Nathan did not agree that night. He did not refuse either. He simply stood in the quiet kitchen long after Juliet's taillights had disappeared down Brookline Street, the small piece of paper with the community center's address still lying on the table, like a dare. For the next 2 days, he went through the motions exactly as before 6 a.m., warehouse shift hauling pallets until his back screamed, coming home to microwave mac and cheese for Ivy, pretending the conversation had never happened. But her words kept echoing every time he looked at his daughter. One day, Ivy will grow up and only remember her father as a shadow that moved through the house. Saturday morning arrived gray and cold. Ivy sat at the kitchen table in her dinosaur pajamas, spooning cereal, while doodling suns in spilled milk. Nathan watched her for a long moment, then heard himself say something he had not planned. Today, Dad's taking you somewhere different. Ivy looked up, milk dripping from her spoon. A construction site? Not exactly. He did not explain more. He simply packed 2 sandwiches, helped her into her coat, and drove south through Asheville's quiet streets until they reached Ridgeway House, an old church that had been turned into a community center. The parking lot was cracked and the paint on the walls peeling in wide patches, but the front doors stood wide open and voices drifted out like they still believed broken things could be fixed. Juliet was standing in the hallway with 2 volunteers, clipboard in hand, hair pulled into a quick ponytail, wearing a denim shirt and khaki pants. When she saw Nathan and Ivy walking in, something bright and relieved flashed across her face before she quickly hid it. "You came," she said. Nathan shrugged like it was nothing. Ivy said staying home all weekend gets boring. Ivy looked straight at Juliet and announced cheerfully, "Dad's lying. He came because of you." Nathan nearly choked on air. Juliet laughed, really laughed for the first time since she had appeared in his driveway. The sound made the old hallway feel brighter. The morning started with Mrs. Delaney's porch roof. The elderly widow lived alone with 3 fat cats and a leaky ceiling that had been dripping for months. Nathan climbed the ladder, pried off rotten boards, nailed new ones in place, and sealed every seam. Juliet stood below, handing him tools without being asked. Ivy helped Mrs. Delaney water the geraniums and told long, dramatic stories about her silver fox plush. Each time Nathan drove the last nail home and heard Mrs. Delaney sigh with relief, something tight in his chest loosened a fraction. They moved on to a small duplex, whose kitchen door would not close properly then to an old man's bathroom that needed a sturdy handrail so he could shower safely. Job after job, small, ordinary, necessary. Nathan's hands remembered the work they had once loved. For the first time in years, he was not simply trading sweat for a paycheck. He was making something safer, warmer possible for people who had almost given up. At lunch, they sat on the back steps eating sandwiches from a cooler. Ivy perched beside Juliet, giggling when Juliet made a ridiculous sour face after biting into a pickle. Nathan watched from a few feet away, half a sandwich forgotten in his hand. Juliet caught his eye. "What?" He shook his head. "Nothing." She tilted hers, seeing straight through the word the way she always had. "You're remembering." Nathan was quiet for a few seconds, then told the truth. "I'm remembering what it feels like to be useful without it being about the bills." Juliet looked at him for a long moment. "That's because you're still you." The sentence was so simple it should have been easy to dismiss. Instead, it settled somewhere deep and stayed there. By late afternoon, they had finished the last repair. Ivy fell asleep in the truck on the drive home, face smudged with paint, but peaceful in a way Nathan had not seen in months. He carried her upstairs, tucked the fox plush under her arm, and pulled the blanket to her chin. For a minute, he just stood in the doorway, watching her breathe. Downstairs, his phone buzzed. Juliet's text. "Thank you for coming. Today you didn't look like a shadow." Nathan stared at the screen. Then for the first time since she had stood in his driveway, he typed back. "Maybe because today someone wouldn't let me hide." He slipped the phone into his pocket, but the warmth that had started in his chest refused to leave. It felt good, dangerously good. And that was exactly what frightened him most. Nathan threw himself into Ridgeway House the very next week. Sundays became full days. 8, sometimes 10 hours of repairs, and he started staying 2 extra evenings after his warehouse shifts. The work was the same as before, leaky roofs, sticking doors, handrails for unsteady hands. But now it felt different. Every nail he drove, every board he replaced carried the quiet knowledge that someone was watching him with hope instead of pity. Ivy changed almost overnight. She laughed more easily, asked fewer questions about her mother at bedtime, and began drawing pictures of the big old church on the refrigerator with bright crayons. "Daddy, are we going back tomorrow?" She would ask, eyes shining. For the first time in years, Nathan saw color returning to her cheeks and energy in her small frame. The shadow that had lived in their house seemed to be shrinking. He should have known life would not let the light stay simple. Wednesday evening, he pulled into the driveway after a long shift and noticed a black sedan parked half a block away, engine idling, windows tinted dark. The car did not move when he stepped out. It simply sat there, watching the house. Nathan felt the old instinct tighten in his gut, the same one that had kept him alive through 3 years of survival. But he told himself it was nothing. The next morning at the warehouse, the foreman called him into the small office. 2 sheets of paper lay on the desk, a schedule change request and an internal warning notice. "You got side projects at that community center?" the man asked, not looking up. Nathan nodded. The foreman leaned back. "Warehouse doesn't like employees who are distracted. Some people say you're on your phone during breaks. Others say you look tired, unfocused." Nathan's jaw tightened. Who said that doesn't matter? The foreman slid the papers closer. "Fix it. or we'll have to make changes." Nathan left the office without another word, but the warning sat heavy in his chest like wet concrete. That same night, Juliet showed up at his door without calling first. Her face was paler than usual. She held a crumpled envelope in her hand. "Did you get any strange calls today?" she asked the moment she stepped inside. "No." "Why someone mailed this to the center?" She handed him the envelope. Inside was a single printed line. "Don't let that failure of a man touch the donation money." Nathan stared at the paper until the words blurred. His knuckles turned white around the edge. Juliet's voice was quiet but steady. "I don't think this is random." They ran through the possibilities in the kitchen. Claire's mother, who had never approved of him. The old business partner, now living in Florida, may be someone from the center who resented the new volunteer. But deep down, Nathan already knew. The black sedan, the sudden warnings at work, the donor who had been unusually interested in Juliet's schedule, Martin Vale, owner of the warehouse, one of Ridgeway House's biggest announced sponsors. 2 days later, Martin proved it. He arrived at the center on Saturday afternoon wearing polished leather shoes that never touched dirt, smiling at everyone, like a man who expected his name on every plaque. He waited until Nathan finished painting a fence with ivy, then pulled him aside near the parking lot. "I hear you've gotten pretty close to Juliet Mercer." Nathan stood straight, paintbrush still in his hand. "That's none of your business." Martin glanced past him toward Juliet, who was kneeling to tie Ivy's shoelaces. "I was planning to give a very large donation to Ridgeway House this year. But I don't like the idea of her letting a washed-up employee of mine dig too deep into the program." His voice dropped. People talk. Nathan felt the pieces click together. "You sent the letter?" Martin didn't deny it. He only shrugged. "I protect the reputation of the center. Or you protect your ego because Juliet turned down your dinner invitation." Martin's smile vanished. "You should be careful, Cross. A man like you doesn't have much left to lose." Nathan looked at him for a long second, then spoke the words that had been building since the night Juliet first stood in his driveway. "You're wrong. I have exactly enough left to fight for." That evening he wrote the resignation email from the kitchen table. No hesitation. No second draft. The warehouse had kept the lights on, but it had also kept him small. He hit send before he could change his mind. Juliet arrived 20 minutes later, eyes wide with worry. You can't quit without another job lined up. The rent Ivy insurance. Nathan pulled out a chair for her. "You want to know what I was thinking when I wrote that email?" She waited. "I was thinking about Ivy," he said, looking straight at her. "And I was thinking that when she grows up, she should remember her father walked away from a place that made him shrink instead of staying just because he was afraid." Juliet's hands trembled on the table. "If this affects your custody, if Martin tries to use it against you," her voice cracked. "If I'm the reason you lose anything else," Nathan stood and moved around the table. He reached out and gently cupped her face in his rough, work-worn hand. "You're not pulling me down, Juliet. You're the first thing in 3 years that made me want to lift my head again." She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, then opened them, raw, unguarded. "If you keep talking like that," she whispered, "I won't be able to make the smart decisions anymore." Nathan didn't answer with words. He simply leaned in and kissed her. It happened right there in the old kitchen beside the threatening letter and the stack of unpaid bills. The kiss was not perfect. It was not dramatic. It was real lips that had waited years, hands that had built and broken things, 2 hearts that had both learned how heavy survival could be. When they pulled apart, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Nathan looked at the woman in front of him and understood something clearly for the first time. Loving again was not the hardest part. Surviving everything that still wanted to tear it down, that was the fight still ahead. 3 days later, Nathan learned exactly who had been pulling the strings. It was not Claire's mother. It was not the old business partner hiding in Florida. It was Martin Vale. The warehouse owner walked into Ridgway House that Saturday afternoon wearing the same polished shoes that never touched dirt. He smiled at the volunteers, shook hands with the board members, then asked to speak with Nathan alone near the back fence where Ivy was still painting bright blue stripes. Martin didn't waste time. I was planning to write a very large check for this place next month, but I don't support programs that let my former employees get too comfortable on the inside. His eyes flicked toward Juliet, who was helping Ivy rinse a brush. People talk cross, and I protect my reputation. Nathan felt the last piece click into place, the black sedan, the warning letter, the sudden pressure at work. He looked at the man who had once signed his paychecks and spoke without raising his voice. Then pull your money. We'll find another way. Martin laughed once, sharp and cold. You really think a bunch of broken people and a washed-up contractor can keep this place open? Good luck. He turned and left without another word. That same afternoon, the board called an emergency meeting. The promised donation was gone. Payroll for the next month was suddenly short. Repairs already scheduled for the Southside apartments would have to stop. Faces around the table looked defeated. Nathan stood up before anyone could adjourn. He told them about the leaky roofs he had fixed with his own hands. He told them about Mrs. Delaney sleeping dry for the first time in years. He told them about the single mothers who no longer feared eviction notices because their doors now locked properly. Then he asked every person in the room to give what they could, even $5, even 1 hour of time. After the meeting, he made calls. He reached out to every client who still owed him a favor from the old renovation days. He phoned the carpenters who used to work for him. He contacted the small hardware store on the north side that remembered how he once helped their owner after a flood. He even called the old pastor from his mother's church. No one wrote a single big check, but 50 people each gave a little. 2 weeks later, the center had enough lumber, enough volunteers, and enough small donations to finish every repair on the schedule. The Southside apartments got new roofs before the first winter storm. Mrs. Delaney's cats stayed warm, and Ridgway House kept its doors open. The evening they finished the last house rain had just begun to fall in thin, cold sheets. Nathan drove home, late headlights cutting through the dark. Ivy slept in the back seat, one small hand still flecked with blue paint, the silver fox plush tucked under her chin. She had not asked about her mother once in the last 10 days. He turned onto Brookline Street and killed the engine in front of the little wooden house. At the very end of the driveway, exactly where she had stood the first time Juliet was waiting again. This time she was not half hidden in shadow. The porch light caught her fully coat collar turned up against the rain hands in her pockets, a small smile already forming on her lips. Nathan stepped out of the truck. Rain dotted his shoulders. "You waited," he said. "Only 15 minutes this time," she answered, voice soft. "I'm getting better at trusting you'll come home." He walked toward her boots, quiet on the wet concrete. Juliet looked up at him, eyes steady. "I have something I need to say." Nathan waited. "The first time I stood here," she continued, "I told you I didn't think your story should end like this." He remembered every word. She took one step closer. "This time, I think our story never really ended at all." The rain kept falling soft and steady. Somewhere inside the house, the old furnace clicked on. In the truck, Ivy breathed slow and even safe and warm. Nathan reached out and pulled Juliet against him. She fit there, the way she always had, like the space between his arms had been waiting 6 years for her to come back and fill it. He felt her exhale against his chest, felt the years of exhaustion and fear finally loosen their grip. For the first time in a long time, the little wooden house did not feel like a place that was barely holding on. It felt bigger. It felt like the beginning of something instead of the end of everything. Nathan closed his eyes and let the rain run down his face. Sometimes the thing you were not ready to hear was exactly what kept you from living the rest of your life, as if your story had already ended. And tonight, under the same porch light that had once felt so lonely, Nathan Cross finally believed the next chapter was already being written.